All right. Numbers have settled in, I think. So I'll go ahead and kick us off. First of all, let me just say welcome to our CSR Marketplace Virtual 2026 and today's session, Optimizing Relief Funds, 15 Years of Data, Trends, and Insights, sponsored by our friends at the Emergency Assistance Foundation. So my name is Leanne Pasco, and I'm a longtime corporate social impact practitioner and now a senior consultant here at ACCP. And I'm really happy that you've joined us today. So welcome. ACCP is the premier membership association for corporate social impact practitioners, and all of these programs, including today's program, are designed to advance our mission to share knowledge, find solutions, and cultivate a community of peers. So joining us here for this today, this is our seventh of eight CSR Marketplace virtual sessions that we're hosting this year. But don't worry, if you've missed any of the sessions or wish you had been able to join a session but just couldn't fit it into your schedule, have no fear because we are recording them. They will be posted on our website next week and they'll be available through the end of the year so you can find them. All right. Before we get started, I do want to highlight a couple of upcoming ACCP programs. So if you're based in Chicago, there's still a little bit of time to join us for our in-person CSR exchange next week on June 23rd. This is just one of our local events that we're hosting this year. We still have a number that we'll be hosting through the rest of this year, including events in Seattle, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, New York City, and Minneapolis. So if you're in any of those areas, keep your eyes focused on our ACCP website and our social posts to find out when those are and the exact locations for those. On July 9th, all ACCP members are invited to join us for a virtual topical member discussion, which is a sneak peek from the findings from our CSR Insights Survey. And then on July 15th, members as well as non-members are able to join us for a webcast where we will release the full results of our 7th annual CSR Insights Survey. So some of you are ACCP members, some of you may not be ACCP members, some of you may be new members, or some of you might want a refresher. And if you want a refresher or you want more information about the benefits that ACCP offers, please join us on July 16th for a deep dive into those membership benefits. And then, of course, our hallmark event of the year is our annual conference. This year will be in Boston, September 14th to 16th. I will say that if you've been on the fence about whether you're planning to attend or not, now is the time to make that decision because early bird registration and early bird pricing ends next Friday, June 26th. I'll just add this as a note because I've seen it happen all too often. Don't wait too long to make your decision about attending. We have sold out for the last few years, and I checked registration this morning, and we're well over 300 at this point. So if you're interested in attending, now's the time to make that decision. And then you can find information about these programs or other ACCP programs by taking a look at our website at accp.org. All right. A little bit of housekeeping. We've turned on closed captioning and live transcript today. So if you'd like to see the full transcript, look for that CC icon, click that little caret, and then select View Full Transcript. We're also encouraging everyone to interact with our speakers and each other by using the Zoom chat. And so please join us, tell us where you're joining us from, drop your notes and ideas and hellos and all of those good things in the chat with us. And then finally, we want to make sure that we hear your questions throughout the program. We do have some dedicated time at the end of the program for Q&A. So you can use the Q&A feature or you can use the chat function to drop your questions. We're monitoring those and we'll make sure that we bring those up at the end during our Q&A session. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Emily Barin, who is the Director of Partner Relations for the Emergency Assistance Foundation. So Emily, please take it away.
All right. Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining my session on optimizing relief funds, 15 years of data, trends, and insights. Before we dig into the data, I do want to start with something that I think is true for every single person in this room, regardless of your industry, your company size, or where you are in the relief fund journey. Every single person sitting in the session today either has employees who faced a hardship or who will. And I don't say that to be dramatic. I say it because it's simply a guarantee. Somewhere in your organization right now, there is someone who has lost a home, someone who is facing a medical crisis, someone who has lost a loved one, or will at some point in the future. That's just the reality of managing people. And I think it's worth pausing here for a second because there are a lot of things companies offer employees these days: health insurance, PTO, wellness stipends, retirement matching, and the list keeps growing. Those are all benefits and they're all wonderful. They're part of the compensation, something an employee has access to simply by being employed. A relief fund is different. It is not a benefit. It is a charitable needs-based program, something that an employee turns to specifically in a moment of crisis, not something baked into their offer letter. That distinction does matter. So I want you to think as we go through this today, is there something in place at your company right now that when that moment happens for one of your employees, is something set up to help them? And that's exactly what I want to spend the next 30 minutes talking about today. I'm going to walk you through 15 years of information, real benchmarks pulled from hundreds of funds across countless industries. And I'm going to show you what's working, what's changed over time, and what the most effective funds, the ones that actually move the needle for employees, have in common. By the end of this session, my hope is that you will walk away with something tangible. Whether that's a benchmark you can bring back to your team, a new way of thinking about fund design you currently have, or simply a deeper appreciation for employee relief funds. Before we get started, let me introduce myself. My name is Emily Barin, and I'm the Director of Partner Relations at Emergency Assistance Foundation. I've been with the Relief Fund space for almost 8 years now, working closely with hundreds of corporate partners along the way. That experience is the foundation for everything I'm going to share with you today. Before we dig into the data, I do want to hear from you. We have a quick poll that will come up on your screen, and I'd love for you to take a second to respond. What is your top interest when it comes to benchmarking against other relief funds? What are you most curious about? Is it employee donation data, application data, which can be events applied for, average amounts, geographic spread? Are you interested more so in fund criteria or industry specific data? Or maybe you don't even have a relief fund at this time and you're just digging in. So we'll give you a few seconds to answer. Right? No, they're going to leave it open for about 30 seconds and then we'll share the results. Okay. So it looks like here that application data is leading the pack, which is really common. And we're going to spend quite a bit of time on that topic today. And it looks like it's a pretty even split between employee donation data, fund criteria, and industry-specific data. So thank you for answering the poll, and I hope to answer all of your questions. If not, please pop them in the chat because we will do Q&A at the end. I'm going to give you some background on Emergency Assistance Foundation if you're not familiar with us. We also call ourselves EAF. EAF is a 501c3 that delivers financial assistance to eligible individuals in the immediate aftermath of unforeseen disasters and personal hardships occurring around the world. We're actually the oldest and largest standalone charity designed specifically to administer relief funds, and we do it on a global scale, supporting team members across 93 countries. Since our founding, we've helped over 436,000 individuals and families worldwide, distributing more than $360 million in financial assistance which is powered by over 526 million in generous donations. Let's sit with those numbers for a minute. Those are big numbers. And those numbers are really meaningful to me because behind every single one of those numbers is a person who received help during one of the hardest moments of their life. And then on the other side of that equation, behind every dollar donated, there's somebody who chose to show up. Sometimes that's a coworker. Sometimes it's the company itself stepping up to donate or to match. I think about it a lot. 436,000 people and families. That's not a statistic. That's 436,000 moments where someone was in crisis and a fund was there. That's what this work is about. What I'm going to share with you comes directly from the 350 plus funds that EAF administers. This is real world information across hundreds of companies and millions of employees. And I think it tells a really compelling story about where employee relief is today and where it's headed. So let's start with who's participating in these types of programs. This chart breaks down the industries represented across our overall fund portfolio, and a few things stand out right away to me. Healthcare and life sciences lead the pack at 15%, which makes a lot of sense given how directly those organizations felt the impact of the pandemic and generally how employee well-being is baked into their culture. Retail comes in second at 12%, followed by financial services and industrial manufacturing, each at 10%. What stands out to me is the range of company types. You can see we also have technology, food services, hospitality, professional and business services, construction, and the list goes on. Relief funds are showing up across the board, and this just isn't a large-scale company initiative either. I want to make a note about that. Organizations of all types and sizes are recognizing that when employees hit a crisis, having a fund in place makes a real difference, both for that person and for the overall company culture. And when you look at company size, it's a pretty even spread. About 1/3 of funds are companies within 1,000 to 5,000 employees. Another third, it's over 10,000 employees. And the rest fall somewhere between smaller than 1,000 or in that 5 to 10,000 range. Let's shift to fund design, which is something that everyone was interested in, specifically what these funds help with and how they're structured. This is what I find where I find the most variation, and honestly, it's the most interesting benchmarking data. This chart shows the percentage of funds that include each event category in the grant criteria. And a few of these numbers really jump out. Natural disaster leads the way at 97%. That's hurricanes, wildfires, tornadoes, those large scale events. Impacts to primary residents comes in right behind at 91%. Things like house fires or a burst pipe. 86% of our funds have death as a qualified event as well. And both serious illness and injury and domestic abuse sit at 84%. And that's worth pausing on these last few because they are really different from the disaster-driven events at the top of this list. Death, serious illness, domestic abuse, those are those quieter situations. There's no headline, no widespread visibility, often not even awareness among coworkers that anything is happening at all. But for the person living through it, having a confidential path to financial support can make a real difference. Now, what I find really meaningful here is that every single one of these event categories has grown since 2021. Every single one of them. Military deployment, civil unrest, violent crime. That growth tells me that companies are listening and becoming more responsive over time. I think it reflects something bigger as well, a shift in how employers are thinking about their role in an employee's life. It's not just about what happens at work anymore. It's about recognizing that when life falls apart outside of work, it affects everything. And these funds are one of the ways that a company can say, "We see you." Now let's take a look at the actual dollar amounts because this is something we get asked about a lot. So you see over here on the left-hand side, we're going to be talking about grant minimums. The reason grant minimums exist is worth explaining. Take a look on the left side of the screen. A grant minimum ensures that the fund is focused on meaningful financial impact. A minimum also helps ensure the fund stays cost effective. Processing smaller grants takes just as much administrative work as the larger ones. So minimums help direct donor dollars towards the greatest impact. The data is pretty clear. About 77% of our funds have the grant minimum at $500, which is industry standard. And about 13% of funds have the minimum under 500 and 9% set it higher. So you have some variation, but most are at that $500 mark. Now let's take a look at the right-hand side of the screen. There's quite variety here. Grant maximums. Grant maximum is the total amount that can be awarded, and this tells a more varied story. And if you're looking at the chart with me, you can see why. So let's start at the top with the dark navy blue. Just 2% of funds cap the maximum under $1,000. That's the smallest slice on this chart, as you can see, and it's not a very common approach. Most of the funds tend to land higher, which we will see. We're going to move counterclockwise. So moving counterclockwise into the green, that's about 7% of funds. The grant maximum is above 5,000. Next, we have purple, 20%. 20% of those funds land between 4,000 and 5,000 for a grant maximum. Then yellow, it's about 15%, and those fall between 3 to 4,000. Now we're going to hit the biggest slice of the pie, the blue part. So that's 34% of our funds land between 2 and 3,000. That's the single largest group, and it tells you a lot about where the industry is at now. This is the number that's emerged over years of figuring out what actually moves the needle. It's the sweet spot, if you will. And finally, we're going to round back to the top in orange. 22% of funds cap the maximum between 1,000 and 1,999. Still meaningful, still impactful, just a little bit more conservative. And we do see the scenario sometimes for funds that are newer or still building out their donor base. A lot of variation makes sense when you think about who a fund is designed for. A company with a large hourly or low wage workforce is going to think about grant amounts very differently than a company with higher wage earners, and that's normal. Often fundraising expectations also play a role in determining grant maximums, as a fund needs to balance helping as many people as possible with an amount that's impactful with funding available. And if you have a global footprint, the cost of living differences across countries does add another layer. What this ultimately tells us is that funds are designed to provide meaningful short-term relief. They're not meant to solve every financial problem someone might face. That $500 minimum and the clustering around 2 to 3,000 on the maximum side reflects what relief funds have found, again, to be the sweet spot for helping bridge that gap. Two more benchmarks worth paying attention to here. First, the application window on the right. The majority of our funds allow individuals to apply within 180 days of the hardship event. And that's what we recommend per relief fund best practices. Over the years, we found that to be the most impactful. People need time. Sometimes an employee doesn't know the fund exists right away. Sometimes they're not ready to ask for help yet. A shorter window, like 60 days, can mean people miss out simply because life got in the way. And then if we move over to the frequency side on the right, you can see it's almost a perfect split. 48% of funds allow 2 grants every 12 months, and 47% allow 1. In our experience, that decision often comes down to budget more than anything else. There's no wrong answer, but for companies that are just getting started, we do typically suggest being a little conservative at first. The fund criteria can always be expanded as the company gets a feel for utilization and what the employee population actually needs. We always say it's much easier to open things up over time than to pull back. And honestly, both of these numbers come down to the same idea for me: giving people room to come forward when they're ready, and room for the fund to possibly grow over time. If you're currently have a relief fund, it may be worth asking yourself if you've looked at the fund criteria lately. Now let's look at how grants are actually being distributed. The mechanics of getting money into people's hands is a very important part of the process, as you can imagine. This slide looks at how grants are actually being paid out. And the shift from 2018 to 2025 is pretty interesting. Electronic checks were the dominant method in 2018 at 57%, and you can see that over on the left-hand side of the screen. And while it's still the most common today, it has dropped to 47%. Paper checks have also declined from 15% down all the way to 5, which honestly makes sense. When somebody is in the middle of crisis, waiting on a check in the mail is the last thing they need. In many situations, like evacuation or displacement from a home, getting a paper check is not just inconvenient, but it's nearly impossible. The shift toward faster, more accessible payment methods is one of the most practical improvements we've seen. What has grown is gift cards, which is up from 6% to 18%, and direct electronic payment from 22% to 29%. That shift reflects something we hear from grantees all the time. When someone is dealing with an emergency, speed matters. Getting funds into someone's hands quickly through a method that's easy to access is just as important as the grant amount itself. Think about it this way. If someone's house just flooded, they're in a hotel with their whole family and their dogs and their cats. A direct payment or gift card they can use immediately is worth way more in that moment than a check that may take several days to arrive at an address they're not even at right now. So earlier, if you think back, we talked about which events funds choose to include in the criteria. And this slide is the other half of that story. What employees are actually applying for once that criteria is in place. Now let's look at what people are actually applying for, and this is where the data gets really personal. Over the last 15 years, funds have supported individuals through a wide range of events, through natural disasters, medical emergencies, representing the most common requests for assistance. Natural and qualified disasters top the list at 34% here in yellow. Think about those floods, fires, tornadoes, blizzards. Those are all events that make the headlines. They account for a significant portion of what we see people apply for. Medical events in blue is 28%, which includes those serious illnesses, injuries, emergency surgeries. And then you have death coming in at 9% and impacts to a primary residence at 7%. While large-scale disasters often capture attention, the data highlights the significant impact of everyday hardships. A fund that's built to respond to both is one that will be most impactful and most sustainable. All right, we're going to go to applications by state. So this map shows the US grant applications by state from 2022 to 2025. And the pattern makes a lot of sense when you think about it. Texas and Florida are the highest volume. They're in pink, orange, red color. And that is because of the hurricanes. The frequency of disasters in those states over the years continues to grow. Hurricanes, flooding, severe storms. I do want to take a minute to point out Georgia and North Carolina in the purple shading because it's actually pretty rare to see that high level of applications in those states. And that's because Hurricane Helene hit that region at the end of 2024, which I'm sure most of you remember. We saw a real spike in activity there. It's a good reminder thinking about that these patterns aren't fixed. A state that's typically lower in volume can shift quickly when a major event hits, and funds need to be ready for that, even in places that don't usually top the list, like Georgia and North Carolina. But I want you to take a minute to look at this map. And is there anything that you see that stands out to you? I'll give you a couple seconds. I don't know if any of you got it right, but what I want you to notice is that every single state has activity. Every single state. Need isn't a regional issue. Employees everywhere are facing hardships, and funds everywhere are being put to use. For those of you managing funds with a national workforce, this is a good reminder that need doesn't cluster in one place. Your employees in the Midwest, the Northeast, the West Coast, they're all potential applicants at some point. Take a second and think about where your workforce is concentrated on this map. Because whatever state lights up for you, those are real people, and statistically, some of them will face a hardship this year. The question is whether there's something in place when they do. And that brings us to the part of all of that makes this all possible, donation trends. It's the giving side of things. Because a fund is only as strong as its donation base, and the trends here are ones that I genuinely love to talk about. This may be one of my favorite slides in the whole deck because this trend is genuinely exciting. And it's one of the clearest signs of where the space is headed. Average individual donations have nearly doubled in just 2 years. $166 average donation in 2023, $238 in 2024, $339 in 2025. Let that sink in for a second. That's not a small uptick. That's donations more than doubling in a 2-year window. Part of that probably is disaster driven. When employees watch their colleagues get hit by a hurricane after hurricane or experience a wildfire, they do tend to want to help, and that instinct shows up in the data. But I do think it goes a bit deeper than that. Companies are getting better about talking about employee relief funds. They're normalizing the conversation, making it easier to donate, and giving employees a real outlet for that desire to look out for each other. And when you give people the chance to help, guess what? They do show up. This isn't just a story about generosity increasing in a vacuum. It's a story about access. When the giving process is simple and visible, people take advantage of it. The donation breakdown on the right reinforces this too. 80% of donations come from a fund sponsor, the company in most scenarios, and 20% come from those individual donors that we just talked about. That shared responsibility model is really powerful. And as you can see, the individual piece is growing, and we expect it to year over year. Payroll giving. Payroll giving is incorporated by 40% of our funds, and it is one of the most effective tools we see. When an employee can set up a small recurring contribution directly from their paycheck, it removes that friction entirely. They set it up once, and that's it. They don't have to think about it every single pay cycle. And think about yourself for a second. Do you always remember to log in to donate to the charity of your choice every month? Honestly, I don't. Life gets busy, and even when I genuinely want to give, it's easy for it to slip my mind. And that's exactly the friction payroll giving removes. It takes the remembering out of the equation entirely. And those small, consistent amounts add up quickly across a workforce. $1, $5, $10 per paycheck doesn't feel like a lot to one person. But if you think about multiplying that across hundreds or thousands of employees every single paycheck, it becomes a real sustainable funding source. Matching dollars in orange accounts for 32% of our funds. And this works almost like a multiplier effect. It's a great way for the company to amplify what employees are already doing. And honestly, it's a strong incentive to give in the first place. When an employee knows their $25 becomes $50, or their $50 becomes $100, they're more likely to participate because suddenly their contribution feels like it's having twice the impact. It also sends a message. It shows employees that the company isn't just standing on the sidelines, it's matching their generosity dollar for dollar. Both of these approaches create accessible, scalable ways to drive sustained giving over time. Rather than relying on a one-time spike after a disaster, if the fund isn't using one or both of these yet, it's genuinely worth exploring on your end. They're straightforward to implement, they don't require a huge lift operationally, and the impact long term for donor engagement is real and measurable. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground today, and I hope the data and insights we walk through give you a clear picture of where employee relief fund landscape stands today, and maybe a little picture into where it's heading. Before I hand it over for Q&A, I want to leave you with this. Behind every data point we looked at today, remember there is a person associated with that. Someone who lost their home, someone who got a diagnosis they weren't expecting, someone who lost a family member and couldn't afford to take time off. The data shows that when you build these programs thoughtfully, when you get the criteria right, the grant amounts right, the giving culture right, they work. They really, really work. And even more, where that came from,
Did we lose Emily?
I think we
think sh-
may have, yeah.
yeah, I think
I
she froze, Michelle. So
Okay,
if
yeah.
I
no
can, do
problem.
you have more slides? I'll grant you slide control and you can take over.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, everyone. Of course, there's always weather happening, and I think Emily's been impacted by storms in South Carolina, but I can jump in. She's actually quite close to the end. So, what we're sharing here is that we have more data available in our 15-year report that was just released this week. So, you can go ahead and pull out your phone and scan the QR code on the screen. The full 15-year report is available to you right now at no cost, and it goes much deeper into the benchmarks, trends, and event data that shape how most effective funds are designed and managed. So, we thank all of you for joining us today. I hope you're leaving with something tangible, whether that's a benchmark to bring back to your team, a fun design consideration worth exploring, or simply a stronger sense of what these programs mean to the employees who need them most. We appreciate you being here and happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thanks, Michelle, for jumping in. Barbara, can you tell if looks like maybe Emily's trying to get back in.
I am. I'm so sorry. I'm on my phone though.
No worries at all, Emily. Thank you. And thank you, Michelle, for jumping in so quickly. I just want to start by saying that personally listening to all of that information was really eye-opening. And the two things that really caught my ear were how companies are getting more comfortable talking about these employee relief funds. And when I drew that back to one of the earlier slides of every grant criteria category having grown in the past few years, it really speaks to the breadth of the issue. And I really love, Emily, what you talked about, in that behind every one of these is a person, right? And when you think about it, just such a powerful set of information that you've left us with here today. Um, Thank you to the folks that jumped in and said you're dialing in from the various places and places that you're representing, both locally and globally, and some of those really high impact areas that was highlighted in this slide. If you've got questions, now's the time to drop them in the chat. I can see that we did just get a question about the QR codes and the slides, and yes, those will be shared. But if you've got other questions, please drop them in the chat. I do have a couple of questions, though, that had come in and we aggregated a little bit earlier. So if you're okay with that, Michelle and Emily, I'll go ahead and ask you those. So first, you've been collecting and analyzing this data for 15 years. What trend or finding has surprised you the most, and why?
I can start with that, and Emily, feel free to jump in. I think to me, the biggest trend that has surprised us is the growth in mechanisms for employee donations. We always expect to see as more companies learn about what funds are capable of, seeing that growth in eligibility and the types of events you expect to some extent. But seeing the plethora of options for employees to give not just the, payroll deduction and matching, but also campaigns that are going on, annual events, things where they're tying the fund to things that are happening within the company on a regular basis to really embed it as part of the culture, I think is one of the most inspiring things we've seen.
Beautiful. Emily, I
Just
know you're, oh, go ahead.
I'll add to that. I hope you all can hear me. I'm still on my phone, but
We
I think
can.
what surprised me most is working with all of these different fun partners that we have is you never know who inside a company needs help. Crisis doesn't announce itself ahead of time. It doesn't follow any predictable patterns. And I think that's why communication is so important. So the whole workforce knows about the fund and knows that it exists before they ever need it. So it's something we didn't talk a lot about today in regard to communication, but I think it's worth considering how you're positioning the fund within the company. And, there's oftentimes I'll talk to partners and they said, oh, well, these people will never need help. So we're just going to communicate it to this group. And we've seen through all of these different types of applications that that is not the truth. There are so many different types of people within a company that need support, and they just might be quiet
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah. Such a really important reminder. Um, Got another question here. How is a relief fund different from an EAP or other company benefits?
I can take that one. So that's honestly a common point of confusion that I run into. An EAP, which is, I'm sure you're all familiar with, Employee Assistance Program, is typically a service-based benefit. So you think about those counseling sessions, legal consultations, some sort of financial coaching. Most companies offer one, and it's certainly a valuable resource, but it's a really good distinction to make. The names sound somewhat similar. A
Yeah.
relief fund, though, is fundamentally different. And the distinction really comes down to what kind of support is being delivered. It's good to remember a relief fund is a charitable grant program. When someone faces a qualifying hardship, be it that house fire, medical crisis, the loss of a loved one, they can apply for direct financial assistance, real dollars that help with that immediate gap that hardship created. It's structured differently from a compensation standpoint, right? So an EAP is part of the benefits package. And as we spoke about at the top of the call, an employee relief fund is not a benefit. So in some ways, these two programs complement each other, but they are solving for different needs.
Excellent. I'm just going to ping the audience here a little bit. How many of you already have employee relief funds? How many of you are sort of thinking about that? Feel free to drop that in the chat. Okay, we have a question that just came in the chat. My question relates to what do you research to help build a relevant assistance fund to truly help you to help your target population?
I can help with that. I'm reading through the full question, so thank you,
Yep,
Dexter, for the
yep,
question.
yeah.
He says, for example, my team was looking to provide gas e-gift cards due to high commuter costs, but looking further into the data, we see our hourly team members might actually need food access rather than assist with gas when everyone may not depend on a vehicle to get to and from work. So it's a great question. Understanding the need of your population can be challenging. And it depends, a lot of it depends on the variety of your workforce, right? How many geographical locations you span, how many kind of what the infrastructure is. Do you have folks in an office setting, in a warehouse setting? Are there different types of workforce that you're working with, seasonal workers, part-time, full-time? So one of the best, there's a couple ways you can do it. And one thing to do is obviously to survey folks and ask, where their trouble spots are. Also, depending on if you're in certain geographical pockets, you can always look to local community foundations and pull some information on, what's going on in those communities where they see the biggest service areas or areas of need. There's also a lot of research studies out there from groups like Financial Health Network that publish annual reports on financial health across the US that can show in different demographics kind of where the breakdowns are. And then, of course, there's benchmarking. So, working with your partners in other organizations, working with a group like EAF, where we can help you kind of look for organizations of the same size or spread that you may be able to benchmark against.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you. I think we've got time for another question. How about how do most global funds handle grant maximums given the cost of living differences around the world? And I would even add to that, even the cost of living differences geographically across the United States, right? So how do you help companies factor that in?
Yeah, for sure. So first we'll talk about the global funds. So that question does come up a lot, and there's a pretty clean answer for us here at EAF, which we call grant tiers. So a flat number for grant minimum, grant maximum sounds really nice on paper, but let's just take a $2,000 maximum. That $2,000 can mean something very different to someone in the US or Switzerland than it does to someone in Kenya or the Philippines. So we always want to be cognizant of that, and we recommend a tiered structure. So it's worth noting that it applies both to the maximum and to the minimum. We use the tiered approach to ensure that those monetary values for each grant amount are equitable across those geographies. Each county or each country is assigned a tier level, which is then cross-referenced with data from the World Bank. And we break that down into 3 tiers overall. So on the high end, the maximum adjusts based on where someone is applying from, but it also works on the other side too. We don't ever want a minimum to be an unnecessary barrier. If there's that $500 minimum we talked about being really what most of our funds, over 70% of our funds have, that can be really tough for someone to reach in a different country. So we keep that in mind. We don't want a barrier just because the fund was designed with a different economy in mind. If it was set up in the US, we want to be mindful of people outside. And then as far as being in the United States, I know that regions can dramatically change from if you live in California versus in the middle of the country. Cost of living can be so different. And so that's where it's important when a fund is being established to really think about those grant maximums and minimums.
Unless there are other questions that come in through the Q&A or the chat, I'll use this as our sort of wrap-up question, and then we'll do some quick little wrapping up. But based on the trends that you've shared and what you've been seeing over these past 15 years, what changes or emerging needs do you think relief fund administrators should be preparing for over the next 3 years? So how do you arm the folks on this call with the information that they need as they're looking at their 3 to 5 year look forward strategy?
That's a great question. I think we lost Emily again, so I'm going to answer that one. So trends, upcoming trends. Obviously volume's going to keep climbing. We all know, right? We're seeing disaster frequency keeps increasing, severity keeps increasing, and the cost of these disasters keeps increasing, whether things hit the headlines or not. So I think, the big thing is making sure that systems can scale without having to add headcount every time the volume grows. There's also, especially with technology improvements, people are expecting faster turnaround. There's also, more of a chance of utilizing AI and technology systems to create, things that may not be, relevant or may not be real. And so it's a continued improvement in being able to review documentation accurately, making sure that we're getting, honest documentation from folks, that we're following up on things. Every fund needs to make sure they've got the right kind of measurements in place to monitor for potential fraud, but also be able to review things quickly, respond quickly, and get people cash in whatever vehicle is fastest and best way to get it to them.
Wonderful. And I see that Emily just popped back in, which is sort of terrific, perfect timing as we sort of wrap up here. So first of all, to everybody who joined the call today, thank you for joining in. Thank you for your patience as we've managed through some of the weather challenges I know that Emily has been experiencing. And Emily and Michelle, thank you for like being fully prepared for your own disaster here of having backup system, and really, really thank you so much for doing that. But most importantly, for sharing your insights and sharing this really useful and helpful information with us today. So my last order of business here is to ask everybody here on this call to please give us your feedback. We at ACCP want to know your feedback about this session. We also want to know your feedback so that we can do more programming, better programming, what it is that you're looking for. Cassandra has there's a QR code here, so you can scan the QR code, or there is a link in the chat that Cassandra dropped in there a few minutes ago. Would really, really appreciate if you can click on that. Again, Emily, Michelle, thank you so much. Thank you so much to the ACCP team behind the scenes that are managing the slides and doing all of the hard work to get this information out to you. Please take a look at accp.org and look for coming programs and events that you might be interested in, and feel free to reach out to us with any questions. We've really enjoyed our time here with you today, so thank you again so much, and hope you all have an amazing rest of your day.
Thank you for having us.
Thank
Yes,
you.
thank you so much.